Let's get into this. Welcome all. Welcome to the Rock Worldwide Show here on WSHO Sunshine 100 AM. Trey Roberts here, as I am always, or most always, on Saturday mornings, coming to you live and direct from the studios of WSHO here in downtown Metropolitan High. We are live everywhere and all over the place. We are live on Facebook. We are live on YouTube. We are live on Twitter. We're live at WSHO.com. We're live on your smart speakers. We're live on your radio dial. We are everywhere. We are in the eardrums and eye gates of as many people as we possibly can. So join us there at any of those locations. You can stream us live at any of those aforementioned places online. And if you have a stomach for this face that was made specifically for radio, and if you don't, you just want to listen, you can do so in a lot of different places. WSHO, tell your smart speaker to play Sunshine 800 AM. And again, like we said, you can go to those places and actually listen to us on Facebook, Twitter. All of those places can be found by looking at the Rock Worldwide Show or typing in at Kingdom Useful. So we have a ton of things to get into today. If you're in the chat room or if you want to give us a phone call, you can do so by calling 504-527-0800. 504-527-0800 is the number if you want to give us a phone call. So we got a lot of things to get to and not a whole lot of time, so we won't dilly-dally around here, and we will try to get in. LaToya the Destroyer. That's right. LaToya, Mayor Cantrell, strikes again. Just when you thought that New Orleans and being in the Deep South, or maybe you didn't think that, I don't know. We've all kind of known that New Orleans is a pretty liberal bastion of political ideology. It has been, as many of you know, it has been since Reconstruction that the city of New Orleans has had a Republican mayor. And that Republican mayor of the city of New Orleans, going all the way back to Reconstruction, which would be the period of time just after the Civil War, that was a presidential appointment. The then Republican president, after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, was appointed, and New Orleans has not had a Republican mayor since. It has not had a Republican majority council, city council. I'm not sure that if you are a registered Republican inside of New Orleans that you could win. The last one that I think about, and it was under the most extreme of circumstances with Joseph Gow, and that's when Dollar Bill Jefferson, rest in peace, Dollar Bill Jefferson, that's when he was caught with $90,000 of cold, hard cash in his freezer right next to the ice cream. He was under indictment and would soon be convicted, and only under those circumstances the Democrats would not put in a candidate that would challenge. I think Helena Moreno maybe failed in an attempt to overthrow Dollar Bill Jefferson, but Joseph Gow did, and he only lasted for one term in office. Even after he voted, was the sole Republican to act like Chairman Gow and vote for socialized medicine under Obamacare. Now, granted, his vote didn't mean anything. He voted after the Democrats had enough votes. He voted after it was all passed. It was a vote basically for him to be able to come back. He knew that if he voted no, he had no chance. He hoped that if he voted yes, that he would have some chance, but he didn't. He got Cedric the Entertainer Richmond, and Cedric Richmond thereafter has now part of the he's like the black chief of staff for Joe Biden. So here's the thing. Right after the election, I tried to teach you about civics. I tried to teach you about the different powers of government, the separation of powers. I tried to teach you about how our government is spread across three co-equal branches: an executive branch, a legislative branch, a judicial branch, and that there are different layers of government. There is the federal government, there is the state government, and there is the local government. And there were statements during the civics class that we taught for 12 weeks on this program. We implored you to listen and learn and to refresh yourself if you haven't taken civics in a while, because this was going to be important moving forward. We knew that we were in the midst of COVID-19. We knew that there was some different battles going back and forth, but there is something to remember. The governments on different levels, according to the founders, were intended to govern differently. The founders believed in a concept that government that governs closest to the people governs the best. The founders intended for you to have more focus, to have more knowledge, to have more oomph, energy, excitement, organization into government that was closest to you. Many of you are not able to name all of the members of your local school board. Many of you are not able to mention or know the names of your parish councilman. Many of you don't know the different names of your clerk of court or the chief assessor, the sheriff. These different elected officials within your city or within your parish, you don't know and you don't pay attention. You don't know the issues. And the reason that you don't know the issues is because no one feeds you those issues. Unless you have like a specific thing that you're interested in, like you have children who go and attend your local public school district, and there is some national news story that there's this big policy mandate coming down from the federal government. Like, you intuitively know that as a parent that's concerned about that, you know to get to your school board meeting. That's just something you know to do. And you know to do that as sort of a barrier, a buffer, if you will, from the overreach of the federal government. It was the intention of the founders for us in our day-to-day lives to not feel, therefore, not really pay much attention to what was going on in Washington, D.C. Because who does affect your life on a day-to-day basis is going to be the mayor or the executor, the executive officer, if you will, the executive politician, the mayor of your city. The parish president is going to and should have more effect on your life as a resident of that parish or county. If you're listening to this somewhere else, in Louisiana we have parishes, we don't have counties. We're a little unique like that. But you're supposed to know and feel their decision making. And if you're your children go to the local school board, your taxes, whether you have children in the school system or not, go to a system that then goes to educate, or is supposed to go and educate, the children of your community. When's the last time, if you don't have any children, when's the last time you showed up and you just sat through your local school board meeting to make sure that your parish school board is implementing policies that are what you believe to be in the best interest of all students in the parish? Or has your parish underneath your nose because you've gotten caught up into what's being fed to you? And what's being fed to you via social media and via the corporate media outlets, cable news, the 24-hour news cycle, websites that you go to, what's being fed to you is the reality show of what's going on in Washington, D.C. And yes, those decisions can have a big effect on all of us. And yes, the spending that comes down has a huge effect for generations to come. But the buffer, remember, it is the states, the individual states, that created the federal government. It is not the other way around. It is not the federal government that created the states. It is the states that created the federal government. So the state, the governor, what happens in your state? Do you know that in the recent census data, do you know that the southern portion of Louisiana gained population while the central and northern part of Louisiana lost population. Do you understand what that means for the politics of Louisiana? Do you understand that means that the generally more conservative central and northern parts of Louisiana have lost some of their voting bloc? And the increase to southern Louisiana means that there's going to be more people into the cities of Lafayette and the surrounding area, the cities of Baton Rouge and the surrounding area, the cities of New Orleans and the surrounding area. And when populations increase in major urban areas, those tend to breed more people who are interested in a more left of center ideology. Are you aware of that? What do you think about it? What are you going to do about it? All of these things lead me up to this, what's going on with LaToya Cantrell. LaToya Cantrell is responsible for the citizens of the parish of Orleans. She is responsible for what goes on in the city of New Orleans, inside and all the citizens of the city of New Orleans. She knows that people are going to come to Louisiana. They're going to potentially bring COVID. People don't come to Louisiana to keep restraint on themselves. They come to Louisiana so they can shuck off all restraint for the most part and just party hardy and do whatever they want. They think that New Orleans, there are no rules in New Orleans. Bachelorette parties come here. Bachelor parties come here. There's just so many festivals. There's so much fun. New Orleans, and people, if this place stays open, and I'm just sharing you kind of the mentality that you would have. What would you do as a major city who just a year and a half ago, Mardi Gras was a jumping off point in North America for this new thing that we now call COVID-19? Mardi Gras was almost ground zero for the spread and the dissemination of COVID-19 throughout the country, because Mardi Gras is a huge outdoor and indoor party for like 2.5, 3 weeks. And people come from all over the world. Some of the first rideshare people got it from international visitors who were here for Mardi Gras. So all these things are being taken into place. But constitutionally, I told you last week that if I had to guess, I told you last week that the Supreme Court was, if they had an opportunity, the Supreme Court was going to uphold the precedent that was set with Jacobson versus Massachusetts in 1905. The Supreme Court ruled that the city of Cambridge had the power. Notice the Supreme Court said that the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts had the power under the general guise of safety for all the people to mandate the vaccine. Jacobson was a person who decided to push back. He got fined $5, which back then probably was a lot compared to today. But he didn't pay that fine, and therefore he sued the city, and the Supreme Court ruled that Cambridge was in their jurisdiction. Amy Coney Barrett, New Orleans darling conservative Supreme Court justice, on Thursday rejected a plea from a group of Indiana students. I told you about this last week. There were a group of Indiana students who sued Indiana University because Indiana University is requiring all of their students to get a vaccine. And of the, I believe it was 7 or 8 students, 7 of them had like religious exceptions as their reason, and the one didn't. But Amy Coney Barrett ruled, she rejected the plea and said, and remember, she is the judge, Barrett, who received the request. She is the Supreme Court justice tasked with emergency petitions from that region. And she didn't give a reason. It just appears that she made the decision on her own. She didn't mention referring the matter to the other justices. And this was the first case about vaccination requirements to reach the Supreme Court. I told you about it last week, and I told you if it got to the Supreme Court, I told you that the Supreme Court is going to stand with precedent. And this is an example of only one justice. Only one justice has to hear emergency pleas in this region. This region is Amy Coney Barrett's, New Orleans' own, and she ruled that Indiana University can mandate vaccinations for their students. So that precedent is going to hold. Okay, that precedent's going to hold. De Blasio's requirement of vaccination proof or a proof that you have not received it, they're going to, it's going to be seen. It's going to be required if you're going to go to major events or restaurants. Now, will restaurants push back? I don't know. Will there be an uprising? And listen, two things can be true at the same time. You cannot like that your local government is aggressive, feels like they're overreaching, but don't get on radio and talk about communism. This is constitutional, representative, Republican form of government at its best. This is what you have to understand. Now, if the federal government decides to make every city in the United States, that is a constitutional overreach. I believe the Supreme Court would rule as such, and there is no precedent for that. But for a state, which Massachusetts did this during the smallpox epidemic, Massachusetts passed a law that said, hey, if the city wants to mandate it, the city can. And Cambridge took them up on it. Cambridge took them up, mandated the vaccine, and the Supreme Court upheld it. This is the same thing. Now, if the federal government wants to come knocking on your door, if the Department of Health wants to mobilize volunteers and go door to door, informing people about vaccines, about their availability, about the different types, to give them information, to give them education, there's nothing in violation of any right for them to do that, any more than anybody wanting to come to your door, knock on it, and hand you a Bible tract. Jehovah's Witnesses aren't violating your rights when they come to your door and try to pressure you to become a Jehovah's Witness. Mormons, when they come to your door, if you go door to door handing out tracts, the pressure, because somebody doesn't have to answer the door, they can close the door. Now, if they come to you with a syringe in hand, and and they've got cops, and they grab you and they wrestle you to the ground, totally different subject here. Okay, but we're not even close to that place yet. Okay, we're not even close to that. So Amy Coney Barrett held it up, and we told you that they were going to hold it up. Now, I want to play a little bit of audio here, and this audio comes to us from the great Bill O'Reilly. And Bill O'Reilly he has his own network now called The First. And you guys know Bill O'Reilly, like him or dislike him, O'Reilly doesn't put a lot of spin. If he had a thing called the no spin zone. Okay, so O'Reilly likes to play things to basically the letter of what is fact. And so I want to start today's program with some baseline facts as we know them most recently from the great Bill O'Reilly.
I still get letters, and I'm going to read a couple of them, about people who are, anti-vaccine and all that. And all I can say is we report the facts of COVID here. That's what we do. And then you can decide what to do with those facts. This Delta variant of COVID is more contagious than the original. It's obvious. 95% of the people who are getting the Delta variant are unvaccinated. That's it. Now, if you won't believe that, I don't know what to tell you. Those are hospitals reporting to Atlanta. All right, and the hospitals do their due diligence when someone comes in. So if you don't believe it, then you don't believe it, but it's like saying there are 4 seasons. Well, I'm not going to believe that. Okay, fine. So the Delta variant now is whipping around this country, and the people who are not vaccinated are getting it and spreading it to other non-vaccinated people. There are some vaccinated people, particularly with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that are getting it, but usually a very mild case of it. Okay? So that's the fact. That's your baseline.
All right. So that's where we're starting. Okay? Some people will say this is not a vaccine. No, it's not. The mRNA vaccines, which is the Moderna and the Pfizer BioNTech, those two vaccines are not the old school adenovirus vaccines. Okay, they're not. And so those two vaccines are 50 years in the making, but they are new technology in that they do not come from the fetal line of the 1960s. The two fetuses that were aborted, one in Switzerland, one in Britain. They were both of those babies, after they were aborted, were brought to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia in the early 1960s. And there was a specific type of connective tissue cell that was harvested from those babies, that was taken from the bodies of those aborted babies. And that cell was then made to replicate itself into a new cell, into a cell different from the cell of that baby. And the dormant piece of virus that you were trying to make the vaccine for was then put into the cell to elicit an immune system response, and then you make that cell reproduce itself again, and then from that cell reproduction, you're able then to mass produce vaccine. So that's the two. This hasn't been thousands of babies. I'm not lessening the disgust or the frustration with abortion, and that it is the murder of a person. I'm not lessening that any. These two babies, I don't know what maybe we should memorialize them, because what we do know is that although vaccines have been around for a couple hundred years, going back as far as I can tell into as early as like the 1600s, starting in the 1960s, there was a much greater increase in our ability to vaccinate people and to eradicate major diseases: smallpox, measles, mumps, rubella, in some cases chickenpox, influenza, from a lot of different variations, all the way through to COVID. But this mRNA vaccine, people say, well, it's not really a vaccine because there's no, this is new technology. This is feeding the cell instructions that teach the immune system without having to infect you, even with a dormant amount of the virus. Now, here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about how you sound. I want you to think about if President Trump right now was in office and President Trump was telling the nation that, hey, we've done something incredible. We have within less than a year, we have gotten COVID vaccines that have been deemed safe, that have been deemed effective. Not saying that they're never going to have an adverse reaction to people. There will be some who will, because all people are different. There will be some who will have an adverse reaction to the vaccine. But from what we are seeing, if like right now, I'm talking about if President Trump was still right now, 8 months into his second term, if he was the one out there championing the vaccines, telling you it's safe, while Democrats were casting doubt upon the safety, upon the efficacy, trying to conflate some of the information. Because remember, they did that before the election. In fact, I want to play some audio, and I want you to ask yourself, who is it that you sound like? Do you sound like the people who believe that President Trump was doing something good for the country, doing something good for us, the people of America? Or do you believe that the Marxists who were standing against him, who were trying to cast doubt, using vaccines as an election tactic, using it as an issue to avoid, who do you sound like when you stand opposed to the vaccine and you don't do your due diligence to confirm the information and you spread bad information, sometimes wrong information, sometimes just foolish information sometimes just through a lack of understanding of what you're sending out. But you send it out nevertheless. Who do you sound like? Listen to this clip.
I think it's going to be a very skeptical American public about taking the vaccine, and it should be.
We can't trust the president and take his word and take a vaccine that might cause harm to us.
If and when the vaccine comes, it's not likely to go through all the tests that needs to be and the trials that need to be done.
Let's just say there's a vaccine that is approved and even distributed before the election. Would you get it? Well, I think that's going to be an issue for all of us.
When we finally do, God willing, get a vaccine, who's going to take the shot? Who's going to take the shot? We need to have access to the vaccine results so we can make our independent assessment to make sure that Donald Trump's fingerprints are not on it. You're going to be the first one to say, sign me up. And now say it's okay. Is the vaccine safe? Frankly, I'm not going to trust the federal government's opinion. And I wouldn't recommend to New Yorkers based on the federal government's opinion. And the question of whether it's real when it's there, that requires enormous transparency.
Would you trust that vaccine? There's very little that we should trust that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth.
We cannot take for granted this process will be free of political influence.
I don't trust the president, and I don't trust the FDA.
The Donald Trump campaign answers the administration can't answer these questions. The American people should not have confidence. Nobody's telling the American people now, here's a vaccine, it was new, it was done quickly, but trust this federal administration, their health administration, that it's safe.
I will say that I would not trust Donald Trump.
How confident are you in the approval process of the FDA right now? How confident am I? I'm not that confident.
Yes, I would be hesitant, but I'm going to ask a lot of questions.
You're going to need someone other than this FDA and this CDC saying it's safe. You got to make all of it available to other experts across the nation so they can look and see. There's consensus, this is a safe vaccine.
What I'm worried about is that there's some sort of October surprise and that there is a pressure put on the decision makers here to announce the vaccine in October of 2020.
We're going to put together our own group of doctors and medical experts to review the vaccine and the efficacy of the protocol. And if they say it's safe, then I'll go to the people of New York and I will say it's safe.
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
All right. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. When you call into a radio station and you start questioning the safety, you start questioning the efficacy, you start casting doubt on the information. I want you to understand whose hands you're playing into. In that clip, you heard the now resigned, humiliated, Emmy-winning, media-fawning governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo. That is pre-elected Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, squad members. That is CNN, NBC, MSNBC. You sound like a Democrat. You sound like people, you're carrying their water. Their message that they were using going into the 2020 election is now the same things that you're saying every time I turn on radio and listen to callers call in. You don't sound like somebody who is looking at science. You sound caught up in your feelings. You sound fearful. You sound scared. And you don't sound like you're trying to promote liberty and life. Because for whatever reason, you thought this was a great idea. Operation Warp Speed was a phenomenal idea when President Trump was in office. And nothing's changed. Under the Trump administration, we had started giving out 1 million doses of the vaccine before Joe Biden took over, before 1/6, before the inauguration. I just want you to think about that. But I want to jump into I want to jump in our DeLorean, if you will. I want to time travel with you for a second, because I'm going to need you to time travel with me to maybe go to a time when things weren't quite so heated. We've all been under a lot of stress over the last several years, and stress is known to like break a person's ability down to think well and to think clearly and to discern facts and information. Right now, we've got so much misinformation out there, and we've got to remember Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. They're feeding you what you already believe. They're feeding you what you already believe. You're not getting critical information that helps you to critically think about what's being put before your eyes and ears. You're just getting more of what you already think. So let's go back. I want to go back pre-COVID. I want to go back really before the Trump administration. So I want to go back to the last year of the Obama administration. The last year of the Obama administration. And I want to play for you a video. And this video deals with the debate. This is what we're going to do over the next several minutes. Is we're going to play about 9 different audio clips. I chopped it up. It's a video that I will post in the show notes at the end of the show so you can see the whole video unedited. And it's a video that helps you to understand what used to be the vaccination anti-vaxxer debate, and why it's not even really a debate as much as it's an understanding of how we are as humans, how we work as human beings. Because if we can understand, if we can bring it back to a human thing, let's take this out of the tribalism of politics. Let's not make this a right thing or a left thing. Let's not make this a Republican thing or a Democrat thing, a Trump thing or a Biden thing. Let's not do any of that. Let's see if we can try to bring it back to a humanity thing. Let's try to understand ourselves as human beings. And if we can understand ourselves a little bit better, maybe we can have grace for other people. Maybe we can empathize with what other people are going through a little bit better. Okay. So the first clip here I want to play is kind of an introduction to this whole thing. Remember, this goes back now 6 or 7 years ago. So that nobody knows that COVID and mass vaccinations are on the way potentially at this time. But what was in the public sector and the public eye for many people was, should we give children vaccines because of the rise of autism that we see? And so vaccines were already beginning to be questioned on a regular basis, but they were being done so in a very pseudo-scientific way and in a very misinformed way on a lot of different parties from a lot of different areas. But there's a reason why, and that is because we're human. So let's listen to this first clip.
We haven't talked about the vaccine debate here on SciShow because there's no debate to have. Vaccines don't cause autism, and they save millions of lives every year. But there is a debate, whether or not it makes sense. And a lot of people counter this with ridicule, but we at SciShow aren't about judgment, we're about science and using it to better understand the world. We see the anti-vaccination movement as a phenomenon to be understood. So instead of making yet another statement about how yes, vaccines are good and no, they don't cause autism, let's use science to understand why fewer and fewer people are getting their children vaccinated.
All right. So if you're watching us on any of the streams, I do have it a little bit loud, and so I apologize. As I said, this video I will put into the show notes. Actually, all the videos I will link to in the show notes, so you can go back and listen to the entire clips unedited. So I apologize for that. Okay. So the first thing that you hopefully heard in this first video is this thing called cognitive bias. Okay, this is something that we all operate. There's literally hundreds of different biases. And by the way, I don't know if it's biases or biases, but there's a lot of bias. Okay. We see bias. We know that if we turn on MSNBC, we're getting a left of center bias. We know if we turn on Fox News, we're getting a right of center bias. Maybe less so today than maybe a couple of years ago. We know if we turn on Newsmax or OAN, we're getting a right of center bias. We know that if we turn on CBN, we're getting a Christian bias. We know if we watch Al Jazeera, we're getting a Muslim or an Islamic bias. So if you're, it's always important to simply be aware of the bias from which you're getting information, because then you can interact with the information already with the understanding of what the bias is. And then you're not frustrated. You get frustrated when you watch something because you go into it thinking, I'm going to get some information, and then you receive that information and it goes against your own bias. So the first question we want to ask is, how does bias actually work? Okay, so let's find out how bias actually works.
First, let's discuss how we ended up with this imagined link between vaccinations and autism in the first place. Autism diagnoses are definitely on the rise. Now, many scientists believe that this is largely or even completely because of more effective diagnosis and changes in how the diagnosis is reported. So while the diagnoses of autism are increasing, we can't say for sure whether the incidence of autism is also increasing. If it is, it must be because of some environmental factor. Now, when we talk about autism, we're really referring to a range of developmental disorders which can affect a person's ability to communicate or socialize, or cause them to develop patterns of behavior that become pretty specific and inflexible. The condition can manifest itself in a lot of different ways, but you've probably heard of them referred to together as autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. While ASD has been found to have some strong genetic components to it, there also seem to be environmental factors at work as well. And that's really the root of this controversy. We simply don't know precisely what causes autism. And in the absence of explanations, people try to make sense of it themselves. And the way our brains do that is almost entirely with cognitive bias.
Now, this is also a great explanation for why conspiracy theories are so juicy, and for why we want to believe that Anthony Fauci sat on the board with Bill Gates, and while Bill Gates was around and he's a pro-vaxxer, and while he was around vaccinating the third world countries, trying to cull the herd and trying to prevent poor people from reproducing through the polio vaccines, and he's got a patent of microchips that fit inside of nanotechnology that can be put into a vaccine, and that's going to be the mark of the, like, when things around us are not going well in a way that makes sense to us, it doesn't make sense how this is possible to be going. This is the kind of stuff that happens. We want to try and make sense of things. So what we know and what we think we know our brain naturally begins to try to piece together. And when we hear somebody say it the way we think it resonates with us, and we say, that must be true. In fact, let's go a little bit further here with how cognitive bias works.
Cognitive bias is really just anything that skews how we process and interpret new information. There are tons of different kinds of bias. Some biases cause us to ignore certain data, others lead us to put too much emphasis on certain data. They can even drive us to focus on facts that are actually irrelevant to what we're observing. But essentially, when we hear a hypothesis and think, yeah, that makes sense, really what we're saying is, yeah, that fits with my cognitive biases.
Now, this is a great example in the 2020 election results. 2020 election results, tons of people believe that they have seen evidence of a stolen election. And I'm one of those people. I'm one of the people that have seen Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood give testimony before state legislative committees. And I've seen witnesses that have testified to discrepancies. There's things with the post office. There's video from Project Veritas. There is ample, what appears to be to you and I out there, to be ample evidence to confirm to us that there's no chance in Hades that Sleepy Joe Basement Biden beat President Trump in this last election. But let me tell you what must also be true. If you can't present evidence in a court of law to the standard that the courts require, you have no evidence. So don't get frustrated when you see conservative commentators, when you see conservative networks. Don't get frustrated when you hear them say that there is no evidence of a stolen election, because what you mean, what you think they're saying when they say that, and what they mean when they say it are two different things. That there is no evidence means there is nothing that can be brought before a court. Sidney Powell took back several of the court cases that she filed. Lynn Wood took back. They didn't get kicked out of the court. They didn't get kicked off of that. What there were courts that didn't want to see anything? Yes, because when they looked at the brief that was filed with them on almost every occasion, there was nothing in the brief that elevated itself to the standard and to the level. Now, I believe there were like 60 cases brought up during after the election. And see, this is something that President Trump knows. This is something that President Trump's lawyers were advising him on. This is the reason that Rudy Giuliani has gotten in trouble, because Rudy Giuliani went out there and said things as a lawyer. And if you're a lawyer, you can't go in front of cameras and you can't go out there and make misrepresentations. Now, Rudy Giuliani, to his defense, Rudy Giuliani would say, hey, I've got the sworn affidavits. I've got the people willing to testify. If they're lying, that's not on me. I take their word for face value. I take that they're not lying to me, and that if we get before a court, they would testify the same way that they've told me. So I'm repeating what someone else told them. That's what he's going to argue. And that's why it'll look like a political witch hunt, and he'll probably eventually get his law license back. But when they say there's no evidence of a stolen election, that's going to run contrary to what you believe. If you believe the election was stolen, and if you go watch hours of YouTube videos and hours of testimony given before state legislatures, you're going to be screaming at YouTube. You're going to get on radio, and you're going to continue to push a narrative that, quite honestly, the country has moved on. There is no grounds by which we have to reverse the 2020 election. And what's happening right now is we're falling behind in the 2022 midterms, because we should be talking about the crisis at the border. We should be talking about the runaway spending that's going on in Congress right now. We should be talking about the fundamental transformation of the United States of America. We should be talking about what the most radical Democrat administration since Barack Obama, and only since Woodrow Wilson and possibly FDR, has done to transform the United States. We should be talking about that right now. But no, what we're talking about instead is we're talking about 2020 elections. And I'm sorry to report to you, this is going to go against your cognitive biases, and this is going to be cognitive dissonance. It's going to sound just like nails on a chalkboard, but there hasn't been evidence of widespread fraud and a coordinated, organized, even in individual states, there hasn't been enough evidence to bring the level of the standard of evidence necessary before a court of law. That's the big difference. There's plenty of evidence to present on YouTube. There's plenty of evidence to have a conversation at a state legislative committee. There's plenty of evidence all over the place. And it frustrates us that we see it and it can't be used in court. This is part of understanding how our government works. This is part of understanding this is the government that we take part of. And rather than throw our hands up and whine and bellyache and continue to repeat the same things, we've got to toughen up a little bit. We've got to move on, okay? Because what we do better than anything else when something goes against what we think it should have happened, or remember, we're talking about vaccines here, but we're tying in some other things to show how these different biases work. Something else that happens is we want to try to blame someone. That's we've got to find someone to blame. This is not right. So who can we blame? In fact, listen to this clip. This is let's go to clip 4. Clip 4, go.
Now, humans are pattern recognition machines. We need to be able to figure out what behaviors and strategies lead to positive outcomes. But even more than that, we're on the lookout for things that lead to negative outcomes. This overweighting of negative outcomes is a well-known psychological effect called negativity bias. So imagine you wake up one morning and your car doesn't work. Your brain is gonna wanna know what happened. Did you leave your lights on? Did you drive through a huge puddle yesterday and maybe shorted something out? There has to be some reason why it won't start. On the other hand, if you get in a 15-year-old car and it starts up just fine after having had a bad week of barely getting going, you tend not to wonder what went right. We spend far more cognitive resources attempting to figure out why a bad thing happened than we do trying to determine why something good happened. In psychology, the search for these explanations is called explanatory attribution, and different people have different explanatory styles. Some people are more prone to blame themselves, while others search for an external event to blame. But one thing is clear, we are very bad at not blaming anything.
And what we do is we look at a situation and we turn on Alex Jones, and Alex Jones points out all the things that we just pointed out, and he makes connections, and we start to see the pattern, and the pattern makes sense, and it lowers our levels of anxiety, and it has great explanatory power, and it soothes us, and it comforts us, and it makes us feel better, and our cortisol levels drop, and that becomes our truth. And it feels even better when we're the ones who can go out and explain to people that this is what's happening. I know the truth, and I can tell you this is a conspiracy, and it's the globalists, and it's the Bilderbergs, and it's the Star Chambers, and it's the lizard people, and it's the Jews, and it's anti-Semitic, and I'm racist. Like, it ends up being like this really weird. You become weird. I'm trying to help you not be weird. People call up radio stations like this one and sound weird, because they're not grounded in understanding and truth, wisdom, knowledge. As Christians, that's what we're required. We're required to operate in wisdom and understanding and knowledge. That's a high bar. It starts with understanding us. This is why we're so into conspiracy theories. Because conspiracy theories make sense of when things don't make sense. And if things don't make sense, I don't feel good. So I need things confirmed for me that I already believe. And those people who can tell a story that confirm what you already believe, we love them. We appreciate them. We listen to them. And people who do this sort of thing in media, they know this. And they know that's how they can get an audience. Take a listen to this is what confirmation bias is.
Once their mind has been made up, confirmation bias sets in. Confirmation bias is simply our tendency to more readily and with less scrutiny accept information, anecdotes, and worldviews that confirm our existing beliefs. And again, it is a completely normal thing that every person does. Indeed, trying to convince someone that a previously held belief is incorrect has been proven to actually increase their affinity for that idea. And so a community is born, and the safety of vaccines is called into question. And once the procedure for getting a vaccine goes from the doctor telling you that it's now time for a vaccine, and 99% of parents agreeing because that person went through medical school, to it being a question to ponder, vaccination rates will go down. A 2011 study showed that parents who think about vaccines before their child is born are 8 times less likely to vaccinate their children. Basically, when given an opportunity to do research on their own, what they find is confusing. And when confused, the default choice is to simply take no action.
Come on. How many of you, when you heard that there was a possibility, you had not been vaccinated yet, but you heard that there was a possibility that they were going to mandate a vaccine? Come on. How many anti-vaccination, anti-COVID vaccine groups have you joined? How many pages have you liked on social media? Come on, be honest. Prior to the inauguration of Joe Biden, I can almost guarantee that 90+% of you were not members of anti-vaccination pages or groups. But now your algorithm and your feed is full of doctors going to school board meetings and railing on school board members, doctors giving interviews, talking about ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which, by the way, I'm on. And I'm also vaccinated. So unbelievable. Parents are uniquely susceptible to this next bias. A parent would rather chance. If you're a parent, you know this to be true. You'd rather take a chance in doing nothing and that your kid escape any kind of sickness than to know and live with the regret that you gave your child something that caused them that caused them irreparable harm for the rest of their life. No parent could live with the regret of doing something that harmed their child, but you can sort of, well, it was just the luck of the draw. Okay, here's what I mean. Sometimes we think that inaction is actually better than action.
And this is an example of yet another bias called omission bias. In effect, we judge harmful actions as less moral than harmful inactions or omissions. In fact, a frequently cited study found that when the choice to vaccinate is framed as an action, the average parent will only vaccinate their child if not vaccinating is at least 2 times more dangerous than vaccinating. This has to do with our perception of future regret. Parents report that they'll feel worse if they take an action and it harms their child than if they don't act and the child is harmed by a failure to act. This perception of potential regret can be so strong that even bringing up the choice of acting versus non-acting seems to be counterproductive. A 2013 study found that attempts to convince parents to vaccinate their children actually decreased the percentage who went on to choose vaccination. If vaccination is presented as a personal choice instead of a necessity for good public health, then potentially harmful inaction can seem more moral than potentially harmful action, and vaccination rates go down.
Which is exactly what we see. Now, some of you use essential oils. Okay? You know who you are. You're out there rubbing eucalyptus on your neck. You're out there snorting mint. You're out there rubbing all kind of oils on the bottom of your feet and putting socks on before you go to bed, trying to draw out the toxin. You know who you are out there. You try to eat organic as much as possible. Come on, you know who you are. You're prone to a bias too. So you would rather take vitamin C and zinc. You'd rather take minerals and vitamins because those seem natural to you, because God made those, than to take a vaccine made by people that God made and gave them intelligence to make the vaccine. You'd rather stay in your natural bias. And that, well, I mean, if I don't put hair products in my hair, or I don't put lotions on with parables in it or whatever, those parabens, so I only put coconut oil in my hair or whatever. Okay. Another thing we don't do well is we don't do risk perception well. Like if you're not vaccinated and you're also not worried about the mortality for yourself for COVID-19, then you shouldn't be worried about the safety of the vaccine. Here's what I mean. At this moment, with the data that we have, you have less of a chance of an adverse reaction to the vaccine than you do to a severe case of contracting COVID-19. Your chances of having a severe to mortal case of COVID vaccine, which many of you are not concerned about because it's so small, the chances of you taking the vaccine and having an adverse reaction is smaller than that. That's the irrationality. That's the crazy making. That's not using logic and reason. But it's okay. It really is okay. Because at the end of the day, none of us are evil. We're just human.
Humans are inherently bad at understanding the effects of self-selecting samples like online anti-vaccine forums, and often completely unable to accept that a negative outcome could really be the result of something that's beyond their control, and still not very well understood. This is not an anti-vaxxer problem. It's a human problem. Those of us who trust science or have built an understanding of statistics and bias simply have had different lives than people who more heavily weight anecdotes or the opinions of their friends or strangers they meet online who feel the same way. So next time you find yourself frustrated about the decline in vaccinations in America, remember that it's only because of the dramatic success of vaccines that we could even think of having this debate. And those anti-vaccine activists are being driven by the exact same logic traps and cognitive biases that every one of us suffers from. Only by understanding and accepting these psychological pitfalls that we're all so susceptible to will we be able to solve this problem, and that is what science is all about.
And I'm not mad at anyone, although I might sound it. What I am frustrated with is we're better than this. We don't have to fall prey to the same logical fallacies and the same traps that most of our brothers and sisters from a left of center bias. We're uniquely aware of their biases and their arguments. So let's not use those same biases in our arguments. That's what you hear, the frustration in my voice. I want us to be better. I want us to be honest brokers. I want us to be more discerning in the information that we spread. I want to alleviate unnecessary fear. I don't want to be an agent of fear. I want to be an agent of peace. We serve the Prince of Peace, and people need the peace of Jesus Christ. They need to know that he's not getting off his throne. This world can shake, rattle, and roll. This thing can go like a Grimace McDonald's toy from the 1980s. And this thing can shake and rattle and go side to side. And guess what? Jesus ain't budging off of his throne. But how about we live like that? How about we actually manifest that truth in our life? Thank you for joining the program. We'll tune in next week. We'll be back same time, same place. Say a little prayer for me. I'm having a surgery this week on Monday. So if you think about it, say a little prayer for me. I'd appreciate it. And until the next time, remember to oppose progressivism wherever it rears its ugly head. Illuminate the light of truth. We'll see you next time.